The wind was sharp on the broken streets of the junkyard world. Rusty metal pieces rattled as cold air passed through the piles of garbage. She sat there, knees hugged to her chest, eyes empty like the dark sky above. Her skin was pale blue, her cheeks sunken, and her thin arms were covered in dirt. She had not eaten in 2 days. And she had not spoken in even longer. Nobody cared. People passed her, everyday humans. Aliens, robots, traitors, yet no one stopped to them. She was just another piece of junk lying on the ground. Some even threw trash near her, as if mocking her, but she didn't move, not even when a sharpkin scratched her leg. Then, it happened. A human man walked by, tall, strong-looking, carrying a sack of old wires and bolts. He glanced her way for a second, then kept walking, just like the others, she thought. But after a few steps, he stopped. He stood still, looking at the sky for a moment, then slowly turned around. His eyes met hers. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared. Then, without a word, he dropped his heavy sack beside her, sat on a broken crate, and opened a small tin can. The smell of warm beans filled the cold air. Her eyes widened. Her body leaned forward slightly, but she stopped herself, he noticed. And without looking at her, he placed the tin can between them. He picked up a piece of bread, tore it in half, and set one piece near her feet. "Eat," he said softly, not demanding, just offering. She didn't move. He didn't push. Minutes passed in silence. Only the sound of wind and soft chewing filled the space, then slowly, like a broken machine starting again. She reached for the bread. Her hands trembled, and her lips parted just a little. She ate, not all of it, just small bites, like someone afraid it might vanish. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She was young, maybe 16 or 17 in human years. She wore what looked like an old curtain as clothes, her feet bare and cracked, but her eyes still had light, even if hidden under fear. "Do you have a name?" he asked quietly. She looked at him but didn't answer. He didn't ask again. Instead, he stood up, picked up his sack, and began walking away. She looked down, her chest heavy with fear that he wouldn't return. But before he disappeared around the corner, he turned his head slightly and said, "I come back tomorrow." That night, she slept in the same corner, holding the half-bread close to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't shaking from fear. Not because she was safe. No place was truly safe in the junkyard, but because someone had looked at her and didn't see garbage. The next day, the human returned. This time, he brought a metal sheet, some old cloth, and another meal. Without asking, he placed the sheet behind her to block the wind. He used a broken chair leg to hold it upright. Then, he sat again, quietly eating beside her. Day after day, he came back. Each time, he brought something new: plastic pieces, wires, cloth, small food packets. He didn't ask questions, didn't touch her, didn't force her to speak. He just kept building something. Slowly. A wall, then a roof, then a soft spot to sit. People around the area laughed at him. Why waste time on a useless alien girl? They said, she's mute, dirty, and probably dangerous. But he didn't listen. He worked through rain, dust, storms, and cruel words. One day, while setting up a piece of old tarp as a door, he heard something, a whisper, so quiet he almost missed it. "Why?" He turned around, surprised. She was looking at him, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wet. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice weak but real. He paused for a moment, then gave the smallest smile. "Because no one else did," he said. She looked down, her hands clenched in her lap. Tears dropped onto her dirty fingers, and she wiped them quickly. She was not used to kindness, and it felt strange. But inside her, something tiny began to grow again, hope. That night, she didn't sleep outside the tarp house. She crawled in and lay on the blanket he had placed. There, she closed her eyes and listened to the soft creaking of scrap around her, and for the first time in a long time, she whispered, "Thank you." * The next morning, the junkyard was quiet again, but something had changed. The alien girl sat near the small shelter the human had built, her hands folded on her lap, her back straighter than usual. She wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He arrived with 2 bags in his arms, old wires sticking out from one and broken solar tiles in the other. When he saw her waiting, not hiding, a small smile tugged at his face. He didn't say anything, just placed the bags down and began sorting. She didn't speak either, but her eyes followed his every move. She watched how he connected wires, how he tested batteries by tapping them against metal. She didn't understand it all, but it fascinated her. This quiet man who treated trash like treasure, and her like something worth saving as he worked. She slowly crawled to his side. She didn't ask. She just started picking out pieces that looked important. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, he handed her a tool. Old and rusty, but still working. She took it carefully, her fingers brushing his, and he felt how cold her hands still were. They spent hours working in silence, breaking only to eat. This time she didn't hesitate. She took the food with both hands, chewed slowly, and then looked at him with something new in her eyes. Not just thanks, but trust. That night, the human brought a small lamp powered by an old solar panel. He placed it near the shelter. When it flickered on, her face lit up more than the light itself. She touched the lamp like it was magic. He said, "It's just light." But to her, it was a star in the darkness. She didn't know how to thank him. Her language wasn't strong, and her voice still shaky, so she showed it instead. The next morning, she was already waiting, this time with a pile of sorted scrap. She had organized them by size, color, and shape, just like he did. When he saw it, he stopped walking, looked at her, and nodded once. It wasn't just a gesture of thanks, it was respect. Later that day, a merchant walked by, spotted the girl helping the human, and spat on the ground. "Filthy things helping you now? Be careful, she might poison you." The human didn't respond, but the girl's hands tightened around the wires she was holding. The merchant laughed and walked away, but the human stepped beside her and said softly, "Ignore them." She didn't know how, but she nodded. Not because she believed his words yet, but because he believed them enough for both of them. That evening, the wind was stronger. The shelter shook a little. She looked nervous, but he added more weight to the metal sheets and tightened the tarp using cable ties he found in a trash bin. She watched every move, memorizing how he used the tools, how he reinforced the corners. She didn't want to be useless anymore. Later that night, when he returned to his own corner of the junkyard to sleep, she sat inside the shelter, staring at the glowing lamp, her fingers tracing the wires. She whispered words to herself, words from her old life, her real name, her family's names, but no one heard them, not even the stars. The next day, she surprised him. He came expecting silence and stillness, but found her standing in front of the shelter, holding a bent metal pipe. "What's that for?" he asked, more curious than cautious. She pointed to the wall, then showed where it could go. "Support beam," she said softly. He raised his eyebrows, then smiled. They worked on it together, her hands clumsy but eager, his movements calm and sure. When they were done, the wall stood stronger than before. He sat down and drank from a bottle, offered her some too. She hesitated but took it. "You learn fast," he said. She shrugged, then gave the smallest smile as the sun began to set. She sat beside him outside the shelter, watching the sky change color. She leaned slightly toward him, not touching, just closer than before. The wind brushed past them, and neither of them moved away. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from deeper inside the junkyard. Metal screeched, and something fell. She jumped and looked terrified. He stood quickly, eyes narrowed. He grabbed a wrench and told her to stay inside, but she didn't listen. She followed behind him silently, afraid of being alone again. They moved slowly between scrap piles, stepping over wires and broken parts. Then they saw an old robot, long dead, had slipped from a high pile and collapsed. "Nothing dangerous," he sighed in relief, but she was still shaking. "Are you okay?" he asked. She didn't answer, just looked at him with wide eyes. her lips trembling. Then she whispered, "Don't leave me." His heart sank a little. Not from sadness, but from understanding. He nodded slowly. "I won't." That night, she slept closer to him inside the shelter, not touching, but her presence warm and near. He looked at her once before falling asleep, wondering who she really was, where she came from, and what the world had done to make someone so young so broken. But he didn't ask, not yet, because for now, building her a home was more important than building questions, and tomorrow they would build again. The sun rose with red clouds stretching across the sky like scars. She woke up before him that morning, her small hands already sorting wires and screws with quiet focus. The shelter smelled like dust and oil, but to her, it was the safest place in the world. When the human opened his eyes, he saw her sitting cross-legged on the floor, building something small, a hook, maybe a stand. It wasn't clear, but she was trying. He watched her without saying anything, letting her enjoy the moment, letting her feel in control. The peace didn't last long. Shouts echoed from the nearby camp zone, where traders and scrap dealers lived in tents and rusted homes. Voices sharp and cruel, laughter mixed with anger. The girl's hands froze, her shoulders tensed. The human stood and peeked outside the shelter. Two locals were dragging an alien boy through the mud, yelling that he stole food. Others stood watching, some laughing, none helping. She looked at him, her lips tight, her eyes asking what he would do. He didn't move, not toward the noise, not toward the crowd. He turned back to her, knelt, and said calmly, "We stay out of their business." She nodded slowly, but a part of her didn't agree. That night, the boy didn't return, and no one spoke of him again. The human added more to the shelter that evening, thicker metal sheets, a solar-powered lock on the tarp flap, and a backup battery he'd hidden under loose panels. She helped him place each part with care, her eyes sharp now, learning every wire's purpose, every bolt's role. Later, when she washed her hands in a small tin of collected rainwater, she whispered something strange. "Back home, I was told humans were dangerous." He looked at her, wiping his tools. "Maybe they are," he said, "but not all." She watched him quietly, then returned to work. 2 days later, trouble came with heavy boots and louder mouths. 3 men from the camp walked up to the shelter, laughing, tossing old cans at the walls. "Where's your little pet?" One said, "Still living in your garbage house?" The girl stayed inside, her knees pulled up to her chest. The human stood outside with his arms crossed. He didn't shout, didn't move, just stared at them. One man stepped closer, kicked at the tarp. "You feeding her? Washing her too?" The human didn't reply, not even when they called him names, not even when they spit on the ground near his feet. He only spoke when they turned to leave. "If you come back again," he said softly, "you'll leave with fewer teeth." They laughed, but something in his voice made them glance back twice. That night, she stayed up late, fixing a broken light he'd given her. Her hands careful, eyes focused. She didn't speak much, but when he handed her a warm cloth to wrap around her shoulders, she looked at him and said, "Why are they angry?" He sat beside her, looking at the shelter, at the stars above. "Because I gave you something they don't understand," he said. She thought about that, then asked, "What is it?" "Respect," he answered. Days passed. The shelter grew larger, stronger. A second tarp was added as a windbreaker. Old wood boards became a bench, and a small heater was built from scrap and batteries. She began to smile more often, her voice still soft, but used daily now. But peace was never free in the junkyard. One night, while the human was out trading for parts, someone snuck into the shelter. She woke up to footsteps and the sound of fabric tearing. She didn't scream. She grabbed a sharp piece of metal from under the blanket, the one he told her to hide there, just in case. The figure stepped closer, crouched down, reached for her bag of tools. Then she struck. The metal sliced his arm. He yelled in pain, falling back against the wall. She pushed him hard, harder than she thought she could, and ran outside, her feet bare on the cold metal ground. The human heard her scream and dropped. Everything, sprinting toward the shelter. By the time he reached her, she was shaking, covered in dirt, but not crying. "I protected it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't run." He didn't speak. He just pulled her into a firm hug, not tight but steady, like a wall that wouldn't fall. That night, they stayed awake together, reinforcing the shelter even more. Traps were added outside, wires rigged. 2 alarms, glass placed near entry points. She no longer felt like a guest. She felt like a guard. And when the sun rose the next morning, she didn't wait for him to wake up. She was already out there, collecting scrap, planning, building, because it wasn't just his home anymore. It was theirs, and she would fight for it too. Asterisk, she didn't speak much that morning, but her hands were fast. Her fingers moved with quiet purpose, connecting wires, shaping old metal rods, placing solar tiles where they'd catch light. The human watched from a short distance, arms crossed, letting her take the lead for once. She didn't just build anymore. She planned. Every movement was like a memory coming back to her, something deep inside her waking up with each tool she touched. He passed her a worn-down hammer, and she took it without a word, not even glancing up. She was changing that night as they sat near the heater they'd made together. He handed her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. She looked at it, puzzled, and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a metal ID tag, dirty, scratched, but readable. Her eyes widened, her breath stopped. He had found it buried under a pile of scrap. He didn't know what it meant, but something told him it belonged to her. Her fingers traced the symbols on the tag. Her voice broke as she whispered, This was mine." She turned the tag over, and for the first time, he saw something like fear in her eyes, not from danger outside, but from what she remembered. She stood up and stepped away from the fire, clutching the tag tightly. He didn't ask, didn't push, but she spoke anyway, slowly, one piece at a time. "My father was a scientist," she said. "He made things from nothing like you do." She looked at the tools around her, then back at the shelter. "We were on a ship, running from war," she added. "Our ship was shot down." Her eyes stared at the sky as if seeing it happen again. "I woke up alone," she said. "Everyone else gone." The human didn't speak. He only listened, his hands resting on his knees. She sat down again, her eyes watery, her shoulders shaking. "I thought I was the only one left," she whispered. "And maybe I still am." He reached out slowly, placed a hand gently over hers. "You're not alone now," he said. She didn't reply, but she didn't move away either. The next day, she worked harder than ever. She rebuilt part of the shelter wall herself, using thick panels and new supports. She added a second light near the entrance and made shelves out of broken crate pieces. The human was surprised, but he let her continue. She needed to feel strong, and this was her way. As they cleaned out one of the older scrap piles, she suddenly paused, her hands brushing against something strange, something cold and smooth beneath the metal dust. She pulled it out, slowly. It was a small cube, glowing faintly blue, unlike anything else around. He leaned over to look, his brow furrowed. "You know what that is?" he asked. She nodded slowly, her face pale. "It's not junk," she said. "It's memory." She held it carefully, her thumbs rubbing the edges. Then she pressed a tiny switch. The cube lit up fully, projecting a floating image in front of them. A man appeared, speaking her native language, his voice calm but urgent. She stared at the image, her lips parted in shock. "That's my father," she said. This was his last message. The human watched in silence, not understanding the language, but feeling the weight in her voice. The message ended with coordinates, and a single phrase translated into standard galactic tongue. "Protect her at all costs." She turned to him slowly, her face different now, no longer scared, no longer broken. "My father knew I'd survive," she said. "He left this for me." And then, like a wave crashing through quiet waters, it hit her. Someone else might be looking for this cube, and they might already be close. The human saw her expression change, felt the energy shift. He stood quickly and scanned the junkyard horizon. "We have to hide it," she said, gripping the cube tighter. "We can't let them find it." "Who?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes burning now, stronger than ever. "The ones who ended my family," she whispered. "They're not done yet." The shelter suddenly felt smaller, the shadows outside longer, the wind colder. That night, they buried the cube under the floor of the shelter, wrapping it in metal and placing silent traps around it. Not to hurt, but to warn. She didn't sleep. She sat near the door with a small light, a pipe in her hand, waiting. He didn't sleep either. He sat just a few feet behind her, watching her, protecting her. But it wasn't just protection anymore, it was partnership. She had started to remember who she was, and he knew whatever was coming next, she wouldn't run from it, not this time. The night was too quiet. Not even the wind dared to pass through the junkyard that evening. She sat inside the shelter with her knees pulled up, arms around them, her eyes locked on the floor, where the cube was now hidden beneath layers of metal, dust, and warning traps they had placed together. The human checked each corner of the shelter twice before resting, his hand always near his wrench, his eyes never fully closing. They didn't know how long they had until someone came for the cube, but they both felt it like a storm hiding just behind the silence. By morning, the junkyard felt different. The air carried a strange smell, like burned circuits and melted plastic. The girl stepped outside first and froze. 3 tall figures stood at the far edge of the junk zone, dressed in dark armor with silver masks that covered their faces. They moved slowly, scanning the ground with long metal rods that buzzed quietly with every sweep. She ducked back into the shelter, her breath shallow. "They're here," she whispered. "I recognize their armor." The human moved fast, pulling out an old scanner from a storage box. It lit up red, blinking rapidly. "They're tracking something," he said, "and I don't think they're after spare parts." She nodded. "They're bounty seekers. They don't care about people." She added, "Only what people carry." They stayed low, barely breathing as the masked figures moved closer. One of them paused near their shelter, looking around. The buzzing rod pointed directly at the ground beneath their feet. Her fingers tightened around a sharp screwdriver. The human held his breath, but then the rod suddenly went silent. The figure tapped it, confused, then moved on. They waited for hours until the figures disappeared behind a wall of stacked scrap. "We need to move the cube," she said quickly. "It's not safe here anymore." He hesitated. "If we touch it again, the signal might get stronger." She shook her head, then we changed the signal. That night, they worked in silence, carefully unearthing the cube and attaching wires to it. The human used an old transmitter to redirect the signal across the junkyard, placing decoys inside. Broken robot heads and crushed containers. It was dangerous. Every touch could trigger the wrong response. But together, they made it work. By morning, the bounty seekers were back and they were angry. The false signals pulled them in different directions, making them fight with each other, arguing over broken leads and dead ends. The human and the girl watched from a rooftop, hidden under a sheet of black tarp. "They're distracted," he whispered, "but not for long." She looked at him and said, "Then we have to be faster." They returned to the shelter and built something new, something not meant to protect, but to escape, using scrap motors, old hoverboard parts, and batteries. They started building a sled, not perfect, not pretty, but strong enough to carry them and the cube far from the junkyard. As they worked, the girl paused for a moment, wiping sweat from her brow. "If we leave," she said softly, "will you still stay with me?" The human looked up, surprised by the question. "I didn't build that home for you," he said. "I built it with you." She smiled, the kind of smile that meant more than thanks, more than comfort. It meant she was no longer afraid of being left behind. But the moment broke when they heard metal crashing nearby, followed by a loud, sharp voice. "Scan shows movement, dig here." They both froze. The bounty seekers had found one of the decoy signals, and they were close. No more time. They packed what little they could. the cube wrapped in thick layers of shielding. The sled half-built but just enough to move, the girl climbed. On first, holding the cube to her chest, the human connected the power wires and kicked the back wheel. It sparked once, then hummed quietly. They took off through the narrow junkyard paths, weaving between rusted towers and cracked pipes, the wind biting at their faces. Behind them, shouting grew louder, followed by laser shots hitting metal piles. One blast struck near the back wheel, almost flipping them, but the girl held tight, and the human pushed harder. They didn't look back again. By the time they reached the edge of the junk zone, smoke filled the air behind them. But ahead, just ahead, they saw open land. For the first time since they met, the world didn't look like a cage anymore. They didn't know where they were going. They only knew it would be better than what they left behind. And as they disappeared into the red horizon, the cube pulsed gently in her arms, like a heartbeat ready to wake something much, much bigger. The sled broke down just past the old transmission towers. The last battery sparked, flickered, and gave up with a soft hiss. The girl jumped off first, looking around the dead landscape. Tall, cracked walls, broken metal bones, and giant cables buried in the dust. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "It's too open." The human didn't answer right away. He walked to the sled and kicked the side panel, hard, not in anger but in thought. Then he pointed to an old tunnel just ahead. A collapsed pipe from a long-dead factory, its mouth half buried under rubble. They dragged the cube and their bag of tools into the darkness. The tunnel smelled like rust and old oil, but it was cooler, safer, silent inside. They sat on a flat pipe, catching their breath. The human checked his wrist scanner, still jammed from the cube's power. "They'll find us again," the girl said, voice steady now. "It's just a matter of time." The human pulled something from his bag, a thick metal box with blinking lights. "What's that?" she asked. He replied simply, "Plan B." She tilted her head, confused. "You had a plan B this whole time?" He didn't smile, but his eyes had a spark. "I didn't come to this planet for scrap," he said. "I was hiding too." The girl blinked, stunned. "I was part of a strike team during the Sovereign collapse," he continued. "They betrayed U.S., left us to die in space." She didn't speak. "I've been fixing broken things ever since," he added, "including myself." Before she could say anything, the cube suddenly let out a soft chime. She turned, holding it tight. It was glowing again, but this time, not blue, it glowed green. And the top slid open like a flower blooming. Inside was a small projection, a map, 3 stars blinking, one pulsing. "This is a beacon," she gasped. "It's calling someone." The human leaned in close. "Is it a trap?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't think so." But neither of them had time to guess. A high-pitched alarm from his scanner went off. Movement outside. Multiple signals fast. "They found us," he said. Voice low, cold, focused. He reached into the metal box and pulled out something long, wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, the girl's breath caught. It was a human pulse rifle, old, dirty, but deadly. "You had a weapon?" she whispered, shocked. "I didn't want to use it," he said. "But I will." She stood beside him, cube in her arms, fear in her chest. But not the same kind as before. This was fire, not ice. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Shadows grew. Tall on the walls, 3 bounty seekers appeared, weapons raised, masks shining in the dim light. One of them stepped forward. "Hand over the girl and the device." The human didn't blink. "No." They aimed their guns. "You will die for her." He raised his rifle. "You'll die trying." The tunnel shook with the first blast. The human dropped to one knee and fired. Sparks flying, metal screaming. 2 of the seekers fell before they even understood what was happening. The last one charged forward, blade in hand. But the girl stepped in the way, holding the cube like a shield. The seeker hesitated, just enough. The human tackled him to the ground and finished it. Silence returned. Smoke filled the tunnel. The girl coughed. The cube's green light now pulsing fast. "Are you okay?" he asked, checking her arm. She nodded slowly, then looked at the bodies. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he replied. "But neither will we." He grabbed tools from the bag, pieces from the fallen enemies, and quickly patched the sled's battery. As they exited the tunnel, the cube beeped again, then projected one clear message in a robotic voice. "Coordinates locked, transport incoming." They both stared at each other. "Someone's coming," she said. "Let's hope they're not worse than the ones we just killed," he replied. The cube's light glowed brighter as the sky above them began to shift, stars moving unnaturally, like something massive was approaching, and neither of them knew if it was rescue or the beginning of something far more dangerous. The sky wasn't supposed to move like that. She stood on the broken slope outside the tunnel, eyes wide, watching stars twist in patterns she had never seen before, not even in her memories. The human checked the rifle one last time, even though the power cell was nearly empty. He still held it tight. They waited, breath held, surrounded by silence, until the clouds split apart with a sound like thunder breaking through glass. A ship appeared, not falling, not flying, but descending like a ghost. Its shape unlike any vessel in the current galaxy, smooth, dark, and ancient. The girl stepped closer to the cube, which now hovered from her hands, light beaming into the sky like a signal reaching its end. "It answered," she whispered. "After all these years, it really answered." The ship landed without touching the ground, floating just inches above the dirt. Its door opened without a sound, revealing nothing but soft white light. The human didn't move, his feet firm in the dirt, eyes locked on the doorway. From the light, a figure emerged, tall and glowing, its face not fully visible, its body wrapped in what looked like shimmering cloth. The girl stepped forward, slowly, heart pounding. The cube floated toward the figure and gently dropped into its open hands. There was a pause, long and still. Then the figure spoke, not aloud, but directly into their minds. "Daughter of Alari Prime," the voice echoed. "You were not forgotten." She fell to her knees, overwhelmed, her hands gripping the cold earth beneath her. "My father, he sent you?" she asked, tears falling from her eyes without shame. "His signal reached us late," the voice said, "but his request was clear: protect you and guide you home." The human took one step forward, unsure, his hand brushing the back of her shoulder. She turned and looked at him, then back at the glowing figure. "He did protect me," she said. "He gave me more than protection." The figure tilted its head slightly, then reached into its cloak and pulled out another cube, this one red. It floated toward the human and stopped just in front of him. He hesitated, then caught it with one hand. The voice returned, softer now. "A gift for the one who rebuilt what war destroyed." He stared at the cube, confused, but nodded, pocketing it carefully. The girl stood again, her legs shaky, but her voice firm. "What happens now?" she asked. The figure stepped aside, gesturing toward the open ship. "You are welcome to return," it said. "Your people have waited." She looked at the ship, then back at the human. Her eyes were full of questions, but she didn't speak. "Them." He didn't smile, not really, but something gentle passed across his face. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "But if you want me to come with you." She didn't let him finish. She grabbed his hand, held it tight, and nodded. "I want to build something with you," she said. "Not just shelters, not just machines, something real." They walked together toward the ship, side by side, the junkyard behind them now just twisted metal and memories. Before entering, the human looked back one last time. The wind blew softly, carrying the smell of dust and old wires. But ahead, the air felt different, full of promise. As the ship rose into the clouds, disappearing into the stars, the cube inside his pocket pulsed once, and for the first time in his life, the human wondered, maybe he wasn't just fixing broken things anymore. Maybe he had been building a future all along with her.